We talked about the Cyclops before. We told the story of Odysseus, how in a place where the rules disappeared, he did things he would not normally do. But that story has another half, because in that same cave, there was another person, the one we have been calling the villain. And I want to ask you, what is a villain inside their own story? And there is another question. Is it possible that somewhere in a story you have not been paying attention to are the villain? We told it before. Odysseus blinded Polyphemus, hid his men under the sheep, escaped, and then, the moment the ship pulled away, shouted his own name back at the cave. That was perhaps Odysseus at his most clever and his most reckless. Today, we go back into that cave. We stay a little longer. We sit with the giant who is now blind, who does not know what happened, who does not understand why. Themis, son of Poseidon. He lived in his own cave, kept his own sheep, lived his own life. He did not belong to any city-state. He was not bound by anyone else's rules. He was his own world. One day, he went out to tend his flock, came home, found strangers who had entered his home without invitation and eaten his food, drunk his milk. Odysseus told him, according to Greek custom, you must show hospitality to strangers. Polyphemus said, I don't care about your gods. I don't care about your rules. Some people read that line as evil, uncivilized. But today, let's set that line aside for a moment and keep watching. We talked about this earlier. Got the giant drunk, blinded him. We said that was survival. In a place where rules disappear, the only rule is to stay alive. But today I want to ask a direct question. In that cave, in a place where rules disappear, survival is the only rule. Who made that rule? That is Odysseus's logic. He brought Greek customs with him into the cave. He brought the idea that guests must be treated well. But did anyone consider that in Polyphemus's world, from birth until now, he had always lived outside the system that produced those customs? The giant appears to be breaking Greek rules, but those rules were never his to begin with. They had nothing to do with him. So when Odysseus walked in carrying Greek customs, demanding that someone who never belonged to that system follow it, who was the unreasonable one? Let me retell this story from Polyphemus's point of view. The giant goes out to tend his flock, comes home, finds strangers who entered his home without being invited, ate his food, and then those strangers say, "We are guests, you must treat us well." In your own logic, How do you make sense of that sentence? Strangers break into your home, eat your food, and then tell you you are required to treat us kindly. That is the rule. What would you think? Because we are standing in the hero's point of view, the giant's reaction gets called brutal and unreasonable. But the giant's anger, inside his own world, has its own logic. And then, this giant was deceived, gotten drunk, blinded, mocked. He cried out to his father Poseidon, and after that, he disappears from the story. No more scenes, no more words, just alone in a cave, blind, not knowing what happened, not knowing why. In Odysseus' story, the Cyclops is the terrifying villain. In the giant's own story, he is someone who was invaded, deceived, and blinded. Both versions are true. Notice something. In this story, who is the one doing the telling? Homer, a Greek author, someone on Odysseus' side. Homer writing for readers who are already positioned to be on Odysseus' side. In the story, gets called monster, gets called villain, gets called savage. He never gets the chance to name himself, to speak for himself. This touches on something very important: the right to name. Whoever holds the right to name the story, their version, becomes the true one. Have you noticed the phrase teenage rebellion almost always comes from the parent's mouth? It is the parents who name that stage of the child. And how does the child see that same stage? They see a pair of adults who do not understand them, who do not listen, who use rules and "I'm doing this for your own good" to hold them in place. Because whoever holds the naming rights, the story belongs to them. The one being named can only live inside someone else's version. Polyphemus lives inside Homer's version, just as a teenager lives inside the parent's version. Is there someone in your life who has been living inside your version of the story, and you have never once asked how they would tell it themselves? There is another question. Is it possible that somewhere in a story you have not noticed, you are Odysseus, carrying your rules, your logic, your idea of the obvious way things work, walking into someone else's cave, and then thinking that they are the unreasonable one? This is not saying you are a bad person, not saying you did it on purpose, but have you ever carried a system that never belonged to the other person and expected them to follow it? In the second book of the Odyssey, Odysseus' son Telemachus explodes at the suitors gathered in his home. In the suitors' own eyes, We are just courting a widow, waiting for an answer. In Telemachus' eyes, they are a group of intruders who occupied his home and consumed his father's estate. Same room, same scene, two completely different stories. Every person you find unreasonable has a self-sustaining logic inside their own story. So this episode carries two questions. First, when you are in a cave with no rules, no one watching, are you still yourself? Or do you just become whatever version of yourself is most likely to survive that environment? Second, in someone else's story, could you be the unreasonable giant, carrying what you assume is obvious, walking into a space that was never yours? Odysseus returned to his ship and told everyone he defeated a savage monster. And Polyphemus in the cave cried out to his father, "I was deceived and blinded by a wicked human." Both of them were telling the truth. Both of them only had half of it. This is the structure of most truly irresolvable conflicts in the world. Not that someone is right and someone is wrong, but that two people, each standing inside their own story, looking at each other, both see a monster. No one ever believes they are the monster, because everyone is just trying to protect the world they believe is real and right. Parents look at children and see rebellion. Children look at parents and see incomprehension. Neither side is lying. Both are just living inside their own half of the story. The person who has never stood in the other side's position has no choice but to call the other side a monster. Because the world is never what you think it is. Wu Talks World. See you next time.